Welcome to the Experian session of Data Tells a Story. My name is Clive Gosling. I lead our consulting practices within Experian Marketing, and I'll be taking you through the session today. So to move on, we know that today everything is changing. I'll try not to use the words unprecedented very often, but we know that with the world today, everything is moving on, and decisions for marketers and organizations are ever harder with a lack of knowledge, with a lack of latest information. So today we're going to discuss how data can help play a part in creating today's strategy and informing today's business, but not just the data today, but how constantly revised and updated data as the market moves will help you review your strategy. So it's all about real-time, correct data. Now, one of the things we'll talk about is whose attitudes are changing in the car buying market and potentially why. How do those segments vary in affordability? This is very much about can they afford it, but how does their confidence play out in the future marketplace? We'll look at electric vehicles, and we know that this is the future. Which new consumers are entering the market as electric vehicles become perhaps more mainstream? Regionality is extremely important in the business that we're in today, and there are going to be big winners and losers right across the UK. So we'll look at how we can understand regions and the changes, but perhaps more importantly is how can you link this into an action? What's the so what? There's so much information out there today, which is important. How do you collate it, and how are you actually going to use it? And we'll look at a couple of case studies where this has played a part. So moving on, one of the things that we need to cover before we look at changing consumer insights is segmentation. In other words, how do we understand consumer segments? We need a common language. We need some form of common dictionary that is a tool that allows you to link internal insight, external insight into a segmentation that in itself is overlaid right across the UK. It's a common language, a common dictionary that we can understand and aggregate customer behavior. The alternative to segmentation is 55 million individual segments, which is just not practical. So we need to group our customers together. So if you have one, then clearly it's a starting point. Segmentation is the starting point. But as I suggested, it really needs to be able to append existing customer information into a usable format. So the other segmentations apparently do exist, but you wouldn't be surprised today to learn that we'll be using an Experian one. And the Experian segmentation we're using today is Mosaic. And Mosaic is effectively an Experian solution that uses demographic, lifestyle, well-being and wealth to segment the United Kingdom into sort of 15 groups and 66 subtypes. So that's what our segmentation is. And the first one we're looking at here is Group B, prestige positions. Unfortunately, not something that I'm familiar with, but here is a group. They're well off. Household income is over £100,000 on average. They're just on that runway to retirement. They've got low mortgage payments. They're coming towards the end of that. They've got no children. And you would argue that in today's world, they're doing quite well. Now, when we look at their intentions or their attitudes towards cars, 22% more of this group intend to purchase a new car than prior years. 23% more would be looking to trade in a car bought on finance for a newer model, and 16% are likely to look more likely to looking at leasing a car. So here's a group that clearly has what they would consider a bright future, and their plans are progressive. They want to get more and they're looking to upgrade. If we move on to another segment, again, domestic success. So you'd have to argue that by the clues in the title, that here's a group that again are doing quite well. They're good household income, but perhaps the critical variation here is the age. These guys are sort of, mid-30s to mid-40s on average. They have a family, they've got children, they've got dependents. They're right in the middle of their working lives. They take on high debt and they have high mortgage payments. So although they have a good income, here's a group that's actually got a lot of outgoings as well. So most of their income goes straight out the back door into paying off the mortgages and loans and children. So here's a group that are 3% less likely to buy a new car, 9% less likely to sell their car than before, or put another way, what they have is going to have to last a lot longer, and they're less likely to lease a car than previously. So we've got two well-off segments with completely differing attitudes to new car purchases going forward. So it raises the question, moving on, as to why that might be. And this is where the world of COVID has utterly changed the landscape. And we probably have to consider that the potential path to any large purchase depends on two elements. Fundamentally, it's the ability to afford your purchase at the outset. Can I afford it? Do I have the money? Do I have the disposable income? And secondly is, if I take this loan or a car on finance, what does the future hold? What do I believe the future is for me to continue to pay for my finance? So we've got two charts here, or a chart and a map, and the map on the left. So we start with the map on the left. This is a Experian econometrics modeled disposable income variation across the UK, which, putting it simply, means, are people going to have more money or less money to spend than last year? And we can see there are winners and losers. The Southwest in Cornwall is going to have less disposable income, some of the home counties more. Some of the South Coast, where they're retired, are going to have more disposable income because their income's not going to change. They just haven't got much to spend it on these days. So we look at econometrics modelling that is done by Experian, which is stretching ahead and is done each quarter or half year to look where the future lies. So that's a factual econometric model. But if we look at the other table, we can see mosaic groups. Now, there are two groups highlighted, B and G, the ones from our prior slide. In this case, take group G, which is the middle red bar. Here is a group that, when we look at the tables and translate it, as a group, they think in the future will be worse more than any other group. Nearly 40% of them think they will be worse off in the future. And if we take group B, 30% think they will be worse off. So neither is a brilliant scenario, but one is significantly more likely to think that being worse off, which is why group G, when we reflect on their attitudes to future purchases, are different in group B. So critically, we're starting to gain a reason why people think or behave around the purchase that we want them to take. And moving forward, we've looked at now at customer segmentation, and we've looked at affordability, we've looked at regionality. So let's now look at electric vehicles, which is another point that we have. We probably don't need to dwell on this slide for too long, because we know EV sales are rising. And by 2030, they'll have to rise to the point of being all sales. But perhaps one of the things that we need to consider is, as a market shifts towards entirely electric vehicles, the people that can access this market change. Prior to today, EVs were probably the privilege of the quite well off, the homeowner with their own driveway. But now new segments and new groups are beginning to emerge into the EV market, because the EV market itself is becoming more mainstream and used cars are perhaps coming on the market. So as we look at this, we can start to see changing EV ownership. And in this case, we're showing a type, not a group. It is one type within one group called new foundations. Modern houses, newly moved in, doing well on the household income. They can afford the vehicles. They're young age, they've got probably a young child, but they are the beginning of the sort of married lifestyle or partnership lifestyle, and they belong to a group called Aspiring Homemakers. And again, the clue's in the title. You kind of guess what these guys do. But as a group, they under-index to buy electric cars. You would not look at them and say, I am interested in that particular group. But this type in isolation within the group in the last 4 years has risen to be over 2.5 times more likely to buy an electric car than the average UK consumer. So from nowhere, they've suddenly emerged as an EV group. Now, their early adoption technology that we see in the pen portrait is critical to the fact that they're going to take up EVs. And of course, they have the means to purchase these. Now, ongoing, we take our feed on EV ownership direct from the DVLA. So we have a unique relationship with the DVLA that enables us to monitor and map the ongoing penetration of segments and types into EV ownership. So we begin to see who's becoming new players in the market. Now, we can, of course, as prior, we looked at that in disposable income map, we can have a look at how this plays out right across the UK. So we can look at EV vehicles, both in the new market, the used, in total, rising groups. We can overlay every single element of EV into a map, into a region, which kind of brings us now into sort of the so what. We'll move into the so what scenario. If we look at what we've covered in just the last several minutes, we've identified that segmentation is important. Having a segmentation is the common language. To that segmentation, we need to pin attitudes to purchase. What's their confidence levels? What do they think? We need to append their financial situation. Not only what do they think, but what do they have? Can they afford it? Is their income up or down? We've looked at attitudes and what might happen and what do they think of their new future purchases. We've looked at regionality, and we can overlay all sorts of EV data. So if you think of it as a simple matrix of communication, we can tell you this person thinks they're going to buy a car, this person might take finance, they have a confidence level of X, they have the money of Y, they live here, this area is affected to a certain degree, they're very interested in EVs, they're fairly new EV owners, they're more mainstream, prefer used cars. There's a lot there that we've brought together in a very similar pattern. But if we stay on the proof points as to how this works out, we'll move into some case studies of some brands that are doing it right and brands that are ever evolving. Doing it right today is not necessarily doing it right in 6 months' time. The world is evolving, so we need to look at how we bring real-time insight into these auto brands. So we'll look at three particular anonymized example and stick with our EV story. In this case, we're working with an EV manufacturer, which might not take a leap of faith in understanding. But for this company, we're taking their own first-party data. So it's the data they own. We've created an analytical model that defines the customer's propensity to purchase one of their vehicles. When there is a request for a test drive, a score is generated in real time. And it's a model score or a priority score, whatever the client requires, that enables them, when they see the test drive, how do they prioritize it and the effort do they give it based on the customer's likelihood to purchase. So there's a common theme here. This is not wasting time. It's being efficient with the right person at the right time with the right means. In the middle, we're looking at a used car portal. And in this case, we're looking at a channel propensity. Not necessarily will they buy a specific model, but do they buy online? Are they comfortable shopping, purchasing online? But perhaps almost, if not more important, is there's a panel of lenders. Are our customers scored with the right risk score that will be accepted by these panel of lenders? So we're overlaying with channel and we're overlaying risk score. We're not investing time in attracting individuals that will not pass the risk panel and end up with a no sale. And on the last example, the OEM, we've linked real-time test drive requests to Mosaic segments. So as soon as the dealer receives the test drive lead, appended with that information is the mosaic type. Now, at the moment, that's just mosaic type. But if we think of where we can go with this, we can append to each customer their mosaic type, their group's disposable income. What does that group think of in the future for finance? What objections do you have to overcome in order to get that person in a new car? So again, you're looking at real-time insights, which is one of the common themes of, providing that insight right at the point of the interaction. So we've got a number of case studies there. And as we head towards the end, we've talked that there's an awful lot of information, and it can be, if you like, paralysis by analysis. We never know where to start because we've got this huge bucket of information. Thinking of your goals and your strategies, I would suggest a four-staged process. Firstly, accuracy. And what do we mean by all of these? Well, we'll run through them. Accuracy, you can't market effectively if your source data is wrong. Then moving on to intelligence. Have you captured all the information that's possible on that segment or that client group? Have you taken on external data, such as the data we've been talking about today? Have you taken on geolocations and the impact of their region? Have you taken on board your own internal data? How are you appending all of this intelligence as a tool set? Think of the intelligence as a tool set and the decisions what you build from the tool sets. So your decisioning, you have to have strong analytical capabilities. What are you going to do with your time to be the most effective solution? It's who, it's why, it's where, it's when. It's typical good old school marketing, but it does lead to activation, where activation is perhaps the fastest growing technology change across all four of these areas. You want to maximize your insight across all the channels, but you don't want to communicate to people that don't want you and you don't want. So how are you going to optimize everything on a one-to-one basis across all of your channels, from social media to direct to outdoor media? So think of this as an approach. And if you were to sort of take it to a stage further, these are some of the relevant questions to perhaps ask yourselves as you look into each of these stages. Now, I won't read through every single one, but clearly what you'll see is, under accuracy, is your data up to date? Is it compliant? Under intelligence, an example, do you understand your consumer's risk score? Will they pass a finance score? Do they want finance? Under decisioning, are you making the right decisions based on who will finance? But perhaps more importantly and critically, all the government statistics that we see show that home working is now the new normal. Many, many more people will work at home. They will not drive to work. They will not pass your billboards. They will now spend their time online. So who's moving online and will fulfill online? And lastly, activation. We talked about real time. It is the future. Understanding where to maximize your time now is incredibly important. We'd want to suppress wasted spend of your marketing, but more than ever, we want to suppress wasted time. So think of what information are you getting when a client contacts you, rings you, asks for an appointment? What information are you getting real time? There are many, many other questions, and of course, we'll be delighted to answer them, hopefully, in the Q&A. And with that, I'll thank you for your time, and we'll take the Q&As.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Automotive Management Live virtual Q&A, the last one of the day. So please do get your questions in. If you get the chance, you can submit them down the side of your screen. In a follow-up to the data powering actionable insights for the automotive industry presentation that you've just seen, I'm joined by Clive Gosling and Joanne Kerr from Experian, who will both be fielding questions in a hope to address any issues and explore some of the key points in the seminar. I'm Tom Sharp, News and Features Editor for Automotive Management, and welcome, Joanne and Clive. Good to see you both today.
Afternoon.
Great stuff. We have had a few questions already come in. One of the first to come in seems to be subscribing to probably the first rule of data. You might agree, Clive. Always question the data.
Yeah.
Tom Craig asks, have you taken out the distortion of EV regs by OEM employees and demos regarding profiles and EV regs by location?
So I can pick that one up. So yes, distortions. Basically, the data that we use, we get it split by company and private ownership. So we don't get the detailed sales type, the extended sales types you get on the MIVRIS file, but we just get whether it's a retail individual owner or a company owner. So what we tend to do when we're looking to do profiling and analysis for creating audiences and understanding buyers is actually to just use the privately registered vehicles. So so that should take out the distortions in terms of house regs, demonstrators, courtesy cars, etc. It's more difficult to do that from a locational basis with the data that we have. If we take in a client's first party data, obviously the first thing we would look at is excluding any sort of zero drive time data, so any data that's potentially not showing as registered to the dealership, because it doesn't always, but that it's got no distance from the dealership. So we use different methods depending on what data, but the data we've used for this this analysis that we've presented today is privately owned vehicles. Okay, yeah, I can read into that question what you will, but it clearly says something about Tom's estimation of the EV car park at the moment is quite low numbers. Yes. I guess still at this stage. So it's a lot more, I think, than everybody thinks it is actually, but more than happy to pick that up later if we need to get into more detail. Afterwards I can speak to Tom directly, maybe. Oh, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. There's that provision, of course, the chat room and the forums there. You can get in through the event lobby, and both Clive and Joanne, I'm sure, will be happy to field any questions that you don't want to ask them here, but I would implore you to contribute if you can. I have got another question here, which is coming from one of the viewers. It's how can dealers best keep track of their data analysis that applies to a single business, drill down to what the data is revealing and apply that to a single dealership? Quite simply, I suppose, how best do they make use of all these tools at their fingertips? So I can kick that one off if you're happy with that, Clive.
Yeah, fire away.
So I think, as an industry, we're very data rich, and obviously data is a huge asset. But obviously correct use of data is really important. I think the way that we work with data, the data that we hold is very granular. So it's right down to individuals. We quite often work at a household level within automotive. So the fact we have that base level of data always means we can aggregate up, and be that then look at a single catchment. So maybe a dealer, OEM defined at AOR, or it could be a dealer group. It could be different franchises and brands within. So I think segmenting your data is really important so that it's the relevant data. But I think ultimately, because we can then apply it right down to that household level, so overlaying be it the types of demographics or whether somebody should be in or out of a target audience, that's the most important thing, because then geographically it can be applied at whatever level is required. And often we will work at national level on a project, but then we need to drill right down. So, I think the granularity of the data is the key thing there.
Clive, I mean, in your presentation, you clearly sort of spelled out the value of knowing your audience, knowing the customer that's coming to you. What would you say to a retailer that might perhaps suggest, analysing the data might cause some sales staff, for example, to overlook customers who might well be not all they appear in the first place?
I think, Joe's obviously alluded to the fact that there's plenty of data out there, and once you know your customers, you can understand by a geographical area, region, town, dealer, who's around you, and by understanding those segments around you, you get an idea of your customer base. But I think the thing for me is ever more things are changing. So if you take a mosaic type or group, as we did in the presentation, if you understand that you have 10% of your audience or 20% of your audience is that mosaic group or is that mosaic type, that's a great starting point. But what you are able to do with something like Mosaic or other segmentation tools exist unbelievably, and what you are able to do is append ongoing data to it, because now more than ever what people think is going to happen will determine what they do today. So keeping an understanding of what is happening to those segments, what do they perceive, what do they think, where do they think they'll be this time next year, how confident are they, then what will happen is, quite clearly, you guys can understand the changes you need to make. There are other areas, there are other aspects of data. So for example, there's econometric data. Are the people around a dealership getting worse off or better off because of COVID? We know that there's a group that's saving money hand over fist because they're still getting, but we know there's a group that's worse off. So understanding the mosaic groups you have, understanding the breakdown, the percentage, all the demographics, watching what they're doing. Is that group losing money or making money? Is the geography doing well? There are certain regions that will do extremely well, others that will struggle. And geography struggle because of employment, local industry. So you don't miss anybody if the offer is relevant to the customers changing attitudes and changing means. So you just change the message by dealer. My background years and years ago, moons ago, was the launch of the Boots Advantage card. I'm going back many years there. But what the Boots Advantage card did was understood segments, what they purchased and what the value they had, which is why when you walk into a store in Doncaster and you walk into a store in Harrogate, they are completely different frontages of what's being purchased. All you're doing is you're replacing what am I selling to customers' means, needs, attitudes.
Yeah. I was keen to explore, and you touched on it there, sort of some of the trends that might have changed over the last 10 months during the COVID crisis. Clearly, you've identified two sorts of people: those that have saved, those that are clearly worse off. I imagine probably in the majority. What trends have you been able to identify, and how have you seen consumers change their behaviour over the last 10 months?
I'll answer the first one, and then maybe Joe wants to add in a bit more. The biggest change is, well, I'm dealing in the financial world to a degree, but I'll come to the sort of, the automotive world. The biggest change at all is people's ability to save, and the other one is people's desire for credit, be that automotive credit, unsecured lending. What's happening now is people that probably could pass a credit score quite easily are moving away from credit because there are segments that are beginning to pay off debts, not getting into concern because they've got more expenditure. There's other segments that either will need the credit or know they're going to need it and are much more hungry for it. And those are the people, conversely, that are probably getting declined more, because their factors are changing. They're becoming hungry for credit and they will need it. So it's in the world of changing behavior, it's working out who is a customer that needs the credit and can afford that credit, and who's the changes. Because customer needs are changing. What they do now is driven by today's need and tomorrow's attitude.
I think, Joanne, you had something else to add into that, didn't you?
Yeah, I think the thing I would add is we kind of talked about it generally throughout the session, but it's that keep updating, make sure you've got the recency of information because things are changing so fast. So an example, I did with a client not that long ago where we defined a premium used car audience demographically. So we had the mosaic types defined. But then we recognised within that it was an older, more affluent audience, but we recognised that not everybody would be willing to transact online. And this was a client who was offering an online transaction, financial, purchase the car online. So we overlaid onto that that information we'd already got research data, YouGov data around specific mosaic types, willingness to bank online, to use online banking, and that's specifically this year. So I think, out of necessity, people are doing online financial transactions, which they've not done previously because they're having to. So it's that layering, I guess, of information just to really try and reduce the wastage of who you're speaking to. Speak to the people that are the most relevant, as Clive was saying, the ones who can afford things is a no-brainer ultimately, but then it's also thinking about how you want them to interact with you and using data smartly to give you that best chance of finding the right people. I think that's what we're all about, really. Yeah,
absolutely. We have had another question in regarding data privacy, really. I'm not sure if this is typed out absolutely correctly, but would you describe your personal consumer data as pseudonymized or anonymized? Just say anonymized again, but I think that might be a typo. Do you expect data privacy rules to change now that the UK has left the EU? I guess that's the most pertinent point there.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Connell, by the way.
So I can start off. The auto data we hold is anonymized. So we have information about the vehicles, we have information on demographics, but we don't have individual names and addresses. So I guess, that's reassuring. That's the way it should be. We certainly take data privacy very seriously. We have permissions by channel, for contact and things like that. I guess when we're working with data, we're ultimately looking to match a customer's data into our data so that we can append variables to it to help them understand it, their data better, identify their best customers. So I guess in that sense, we usually have to have name and address to be able to do that. But of course, then we have to have the relevant paperwork and contract in place. Plus, they have to have had the right privacy message on their website or paperwork where they've collected that data initially. So, we are very conscious of all the rules, if you like. Don't you want to add anything else, Clive?
Yeah, no. Apart from, do I think they will change? No, I don't. I think from what I've read, is that we intend to stick to the rules and regulations that are currently enforced. GDPR came marching over the hill not too long ago. Data privacy is becoming ever more a hot topic. So I don't expect them to change. I expect them, if anything, to become more stringent. We'll become more aware of personal data. To give you a classic example, there are digital online and digital data and digital capture is a really big thing. That's changing. You've got Apple updates that will not allow tracking through Facebook to a degree. You've got Google Chrome switching off third-party cookies, etc. So if anything, it's going to be ever more important to capture and maximize your first-party data. And if I was to encourage anybody to do anything, it's get your data in order, capture it, use it, refresh it, and don't waste an ounce, because it's going to get harder and harder to capture these informations online, you will need your first party data in-house and in order.
You only have to think, why do Boots have an Advantage card? Why do Sainsbury's have an Nectar? It's to get your data. We don't need to do that in auto. You know, customers need to share their data with us. So I think it's very much about us recognising the value of it.
Do you think the necessity of transacting online during the last 10 months has made people a little bit more accepting of various cookies and the need to give away the personal data? Do you think people are less cautious and just want to get their transaction done at the moment?
I think most people don't really understand it. Yeah. I would say two things. I don't think people understand it, but more and more they will. But what's going to happen is more and more things will pop up on screen as opt-ins, yes or out. And so the next time your Apple device updates, it say, do you want Facebook to track you around? And you're just probably go, oh no. Yeah. So they're going to be given much clearer choices. And that's, absolutely critical. So I think it will be forced upon people to make decisions rather than the sort of, the automated opt-ins. Well, the information that's provided to anybody when they visit on site, people don't really read. They just click accept cookies, yes, and they don't really understand. But that's going to become more frequent. And the other thing is, I think the lockdown happened just at the cusp where people that were traditionally not really online are now fully online. So, I often quote boringly that there are people that are retired now that could have shopped on Amazon in their 30s online. And so online's been with us an enormous time, but there was almost a shift, sort of at 55 to 60, you were still traditionally offline, you weren't really online. That's moved. I think that's completely moved now. And I think it's going to be the real stalwarts that remain pure bricks and mortar. But I do think what will happen is choice, comparisons, booking test drives, finance offers will all happen online, but there will still be a very, very hardcore committed group of individuals that will want to go and touch and feel and visit. So that will never go away. But a lot of the research is not going to be trawling around on a Saturday. It's going to be online, in my view, because that's changed the world. World's changed.
Just we haven't got very much time. Well, I think we're probably overrunning now. But just one last question from myself. Actually, I was keen to sort of know: do you guys think that car retailers at the moment fully appreciate the value of the data that they hold, and also whether that's the case or not? How hard fought do you think the battle is going to be between the car retailers and the manufacturers in the year, 2 years to come, when perhaps we see an attempt to move the goalposts a little bit?
I think data capture should be something that's incentivized within dealerships. I think it's such a valuable commodity, and quite often, if we're working with somebody and looking at the data, it's really the quality of that data that enables us to either work well with it or actually only use a small portion of it. So to me, it's absolutely critical. And I think, for that ongoing contact with the customer, you need to have their details to be able to contact them, to have a contact strategy, to have a GDPR, data retention strategy. As Clive started off, I think in his recommendations, data quality is key. So that initial capture is really important for me, absolutely.
So value lies in the quality, essentially.
Absolutely. But I think often it's not to sound patronising, but it's lack of understanding. It's like, if you don't capture the postcode, what impact will that actually have? Or if you don't capture it correctly, and often you sort of see a 0 or an X or something, just so that the field's been populated, but not with actual real information. But then it makes actually using the data and being able to analyse the data that much harder. And I guess it's, as a salesperson, you just want to get a sale through, but capturing that data, I think, should be part of a whole incentivization of the role and part of your roles and responsibilities, because you know, it's absolutely key moving forward. Absolutely.
Clive, do you see there being a data battleground emerging in automotive at the moment?
I think I'm not so sure about the battleground between automotive. The battleground is with the data itself, in my view. It's for me, it's how you stay in contact with that customer. That data is ultimately a customer, isn't it? You know, data is broadly a customer file, a customer record. And if you sort of, you know, if after 3 years their time's up and you want to talk to them again, so much has moved. So it's understanding what changes have they undergone since you last spoke to them. It's understanding what's moved. It's staying in contact. So if there is going to be a data battle, it's the organization that knows more about the customer today than the other lot.
Right.
And the more you know about them, the more accurate your offer will be, and the less accurate the others will be. So you win.
I think that sounds like positive news for car retailers.
Yeah, it is.
We'll
Why
see.
isn't it?
We'll see.
I mean, you know, you know, I've God knows. I mean, I've swapped cars all over the place, you know, but situations change. My wife's situations change. It's openly public data. You know, BMW can come and ask her at any time what she's done through an app now that she's got. So why don't they? You know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm sure that they can probably track her i3 is doing a lot more miles than average. So why is that? You know, and if they got in contact with her and were able to understand what was going on, they would win. They would win. So it's understanding what's going on in somebody's sort of, I guess, lifestyle or is it even as a segment? I've got this much of a segment. What's happened to that segment since in the last 10 months, the last 12 months? And it'd be interesting to sort of understand how many people actually have someone's job responsible for maximizing data in any dealership or any organization. The big ones tend to have them as data protection officers to keep us out of jail, but not many have them as data protection enhancers to get us more data and better data. But if they were, and it's not an application, by the way, if there were, I think they would be the ones that would win, battle or no battle.
Great stuff. I think that's a great point to take stock of and finish up on, because we have run over a bit. But Clive, Joanne, thanks ever so much for your time in this Q&A. I hope you will venture into the chat rooms, allow people to ask you more questions if they so wish, and enjoy the rest of your day at Automotive Management Live Virtual. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you all.